If you ever work the night shift in a cemetery and you see the ground moving, don't walk closer, don't investigate, and whatever you do, don't start digging, because that's exactly what I did, and now I know something I wish I didn't. Some graves aren't meant to stay closed. My name is Charles. 3 months ago, I took a job as the night caretaker of Black Ridge Cemetery, a quiet burial ground sitting miles outside town, surrounded by tall pine trees and a rusted iron fence that looked older than most of the graves. During the day, it seemed peaceful. Families visited. Flowers were placed on headstones. The wind moved softly through the trees. But at night, Black Ridge felt different, like the entire place was holding its breath. My job was simple: walk the cemetery grounds every hour, check the gates, make sure nobody was trespassing. Most nights, nothing happened, just wind in the trees and the crunch of gravel beneath my boots, until the fourth night. It was around 1:40 in the morning when my flashlight stopped on something strange, a patch of dirt, moving. At first it was subtle, so subtle I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. But then I saw it again. The soil lifted slightly, then settled, lifted again, then fell, slow, steady, like something underneath the ground was breathing. I stood there watching it, rise, fall, rise, fall. The rhythm was slow and deep, exactly like a chest pulling in air. My skin prickled, but I forced myself to laugh. Probably a rabbit, I muttered. Animals dug tunnels under cemeteries all the time. Foxes, raccoons, even stray dogs. That had to be it. Still, something about the movement felt wrong, too smooth, too controlled. So I walked closer. The headstone beside the mound came into view, fresh granite, still clean. The name carved into it read, Eliza Marrow, 1987 to 2023. Gone too soon, that was all. No flowers, no candles, just fresh soil, and the ground, still breathing. I crouched beside the grave. The moment my shadow crossed the dirt, the movement stopped, completely. The soil became perfectly still, like nothing had ever been there. I waited. 30 seconds, maybe a full minute. Nothing moved, not a grain of dirt. Finally, I stood up and shook my head. Working nights in a cemetery can mess with your mind. Too much silence, too much darkness. Your brain starts filling the emptiness with things that aren't real. So I finished my patrol and went back to the caretaker's shed. But the truth is, that grave stayed in my thoughts the entire night. Because deep down, I knew I hadn't imagined it. The next night, I went straight back to the same grave. I told myself I was just checking for animals. Nothing more. But when my flashlight landed on the mound, my stomach dropped. The dirt was moving again. Rise, fall, rise, fall. Only now the movement was stronger. The soil lifted higher before sinking again, and the headstone had tilted slightly, like something beneath the ground had pushed upward. That's when I realized something was very wrong, because animals don't move dirt like that. Animals dig, they scatter soil, they collapse tunnels. But this looked like something alive was slowly pushing against the earth, trying to breathe, trying to reach the surface. I stood there for several minutes, watching the ground move, feeling the cold air settle around me. And that's when a thought crossed my mind that made my stomach tighten. Every grave in Black Ridge had paperwork, burial permits, death records, plot numbers. If someone had really been buried there recently, there would be a record. So, instead of digging. I walked back to the caretaker office, turned on the old computer, and searched the cemetery database for the name on the stone, Eliza Marrow. The file appeared almost instantly, but the moment I opened it, I felt something cold settle in my chest. Because according to the official records, Eliza Marrow had never been buried at Black Ridge Cemetery. In fact, she had never been buried anywhere. The report clearly stated, cremation completed 3 months ago, which meant the grave outside, the one that had been breathing beneath my feet, belonged to someone who had supposedly been reduced to ashes. And the more I stared at the screen, the more one horrible question kept repeating in my mind. If Eliza Marrow had been cremated, then what was buried in her grave? I sat in the caretaker office, staring at the computer screen for a long time. The words didn't change. Cremation completed 3 months ago. I refreshed the database, searched again. Same result. Eliza Marrow had died 3 months earlier, and her body had been cremated. No burial, no coffin, no cemetery plot. Nothing. Slowly, I leaned back in the chair and looked out the office window, across the dark cemetery, toward the grave I had just left. The grave that was breathing. If she had been cremated, then whatever was buried out there wasn't supposed to be. I tried to convince myself it was a mistake. Old cemeteries sometimes had messy records. Maybe someone forgot to log the burial. Maybe the cremation report was wrong. Maybe... Then I noticed something else on the screen. A date. The burial entry timestamp attached to the plot. At first I thought I was reading it wrong, so I leaned closer to the monitor and read it again. The grave had been logged 3 days before Black Ridge Cemetery officially opened. My stomach tightened. That didn't make any sense. Black Ridge had only been operating for 2 years. Before that, the land had been empty, just forest and dirt, which meant someone had buried something there, before the cemetery even existed. I shut down the computer and stepped outside again. The night air felt colder now. The wind had stopped. The cemetery was silent. Too silent. I walked slowly back toward the grave, my flashlight shaking slightly in my hand. The beam landed on the mound, and my heart dropped. The dirt was still moving, but this time, the movement was stronger. The soil lifted higher, then dropped, lifted again, harder, like something underneath was pushing upward with real force now, trying to break through. I stood there watching it, frozen, because suddenly I didn't want to know what was buried down there. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, especially in a place meant for the dead. And the longer I stared at that breathing soil, the more one thought kept growing in my mind. What if someone had been buried alive? What if the records were wrong? What if someone was still trapped down there? My eyes moved slowly to the maintenance shed across the cemetery, where the digging tools were kept. I tried to push the idea away, but the breathing dirt made it impossible. Rise, fall, rise, fall. Each movement felt heavier, more desperate, like something running out of air. Finally, I made a decision. I walked to the shed, opened the door, and grabbed a shovel. The metal handle felt cold in my hands, heavier than usual, as if the tool somehow understood what I was about to do. When I returned to the grave, the ground was still moving, but now the rhythm had changed. The breaths were faster, stronger, almost violent. The soil bulged upward with each movement, then collapsed again, like something underneath was struggling, fighting, trying to reach the surface before it ran out of air. My heart started pounding. If someone really was trapped down there, I didn't have much time. I drove the shovel into the dirt. The soil was loose, far looser than it should have been, like the ground had been disturbed recently. I dug again and again, each scoop throwing wet soil onto the grass beside me. The breathing continued beneath the earth, right under my feet. After a few minutes, my shovel struck something solid. A dull wooden thunk echoed from the hole. I froze, slowly brushing away the dirt with my hands. And there it was, a coffin, buried barely 3 feet down. My pulse started racing, because the cemetery record said that grave didn't exist. Yet there was clearly a coffin sitting beneath the soil, and something about it felt wrong. The wood looked old, older than it should have been, cracked, worn, like it had been underground for years, not weeks. Then I heard something, a sound, so faint I almost missed it, a scratch, from inside the coffin. My breath caught. I leaned closer to the hole, listening. The sound came again, scratch, slow, weak, but unmistakable, like fingernails dragging against wood, from the inside. A wave of panic rushed through me. Someone could still be alive down there. Maybe the cremation report was wrong. Maybe. The scratching suddenly became louder, more frantic, desperate, clawing against the lid. Like whatever was inside the coffin knew I was there. "Hold on!" I shouted, my voice shaking. I shoved the shovel under the coffin lid and tried to pry it open. The wood creaked, but it didn't move. The scratching continued. Faster, harder, almost violent now. I pushed harder with the shovel. The lid cracked slightly. The nails began bending upward. Just as the wood finally started to lift, the scratching inside the coffin suddenly stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than the earth around me. For a moment, nothing moved. Nothing breathed. Nothing scratched. And that's when I heard something behind me. A slow, wet, breathing sound, coming from the ground, right behind the headstone. I slowly turned around. My flashlight beam swept across the ground behind the headstone. And for a moment, my brain refused to understand what I was seeing. The soil there was moving. Not the grave I had been digging. Another patch of earth, rising, falling, like a second chest breathing beneath the dirt. My heart began to pound, because suddenly something made terrible sense. The movement I'd been watching for 2 nights wasn't coming from the coffin I had opened. It was coming from behind it. I had been digging in the wrong place. The dirt shifted again, this time harder. The soil cracked open slightly. Small clumps rolled down the mound. Something underneath was pushing upward, slowly, patiently, like it had been waiting for this moment, waiting for the ground above it to loosen, waiting for someone to help. I stumbled backward from the hole. The breathing sounded louder, wet, heavy, almost human. Then the dirt suddenly split open. A pale hand forced its way through the soil. Gray skin, rotting fingers, packed with dirt beneath the nails. But it was moving, clawing upward, grabbing at the air. I froze, unable to run, unable to look away. The hand dragged itself farther out of the ground. Then an arm followed, bones cracking softly as it twisted upward. And finally, a head pushed through the soil, hair tangled with mud, skin torn and gray, eyes wide open, too wide, like they had been staring into darkness for a very long time. The body slowly pulled itself halfway out of the earth. Its chest expanded slowly, rising, falling, breathing, just like the grave had been doing for days. The corpse turned its head toward me and smiled. Its lips cracked as it spoke. The voice sounded dry, like air moving through a throat that hadn't been used in years. "Thank you," it whispered, "for opening the wrong grave." My legs finally moved. I ran. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. I ran across the cemetery until I reached the caretaker building and locked the door. I stayed there until morning. When the sun came up, I quit, packed my things and left Black Ridge Cemetery forever. The police investigated later. They dug up the entire area where I said the graves had moved, but according to them, they found nothing. No coffin, no disturbed soil, no second grave, just normal ground. They told me exhaustion must have caused hallucinations. Working nights in a cemetery can do that. Maybe they're right. Maybe my mind broke that night. But a week later, I received a call from the cemetery manager. He told me something the police hadn't mentioned. Before Black Ridge Cemetery was built, that land had been used for something else. Over 100 years ago, during a terrible disease outbreak, the town buried dozens of bodies there, quickly, sometimes without coffins, sometimes before anyone could be completely sure the person was dead. Mass graves, forgotten, hidden beneath the cemetery. When I hung up the phone, one thought kept repeating in my mind. Maybe I didn't open the wrong grave at all. Maybe I opened the first one it needed. And sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet, I remember the sound of that breathing soil. Rise, fall, rise, fall. Like the earth itself is alive. Like something beneath the ground is still trying to get out.